Under the shimmer of chandeliers, the world gleamed, too polished, too perfect. Every reflection in the glass, every mirrored fork, every gold-framed painting whispered the same message: only the powerful belong here. At table 12, Cadel Mungsuri fit that world like it was made for him. His cufflinks gleamed like miniature suns, and his laughter cut through the ambient jazz with the sharpness of a blade. He was a billionaire oil magnate, the kind of man who thought gravity itself worked in his favor. Every gesture announced ownership, of the room, of his companions, of the air between sentences. Across the hall, Nora Hassan moved like shadow and silk. The crisp white of her uniform did little to hide the exhaustion etched into her movements. She balanced a silver tray heavy with champagne flutes, her back straight, her eyes down. To the guests, she was invisible, one of many hands serving their comfort. To herself, she was enduring. The air smelled of truffle oil, saffron, and old money. Conversations floated like perfume, deals whispered over dessert, laughter too loud to be sincere. Nora's sneakers squeaked softly against the marble. Her fingers ached from a 14-hour shift, but she smiled anyway, a quiet, practiced mask. She didn't belong to this world of chandeliers and gold. Not anymore. Once, her world had been filled with books, poetry and philosophy, and her father's gentle voice reciting verses by candlelight. Now it was receipts and orders, and a mother at home who needed medication she could barely afford. Hi, my beautiful family. I have missed you all. Thank you so for sticking around with me. Truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. At table 12, Cadel's booming laughter snapped her attention back to the present. Bring the Dom Perignon, he said to the manager, his voice like a command, not a request. And make sure someone competent serves it this time. His entourage chuckled obediently. The manager's nervous eyes found Nora. Please, he whispered, take care of table 12. And, be careful. They're important. Nora nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Yes, sir. She steadied the tray, her hands trembling slightly. As she approached, the billionaire glanced up, not at her, but through her, the way people glance through a window. Ah, he muttered to his companions in Arabic, the word smooth and cruel, another one of the locals. Pretty, perhaps, but uneducated. They never understand a word we say. The table erupted in laughter. Nora froze mid-step. Her pulse quickened. The syllables rolled in her mind, sharp and fluent, the language of her childhood, her father's voice. She understood every insult, every flicker of mockery. Her first instinct was to look away, pretend ignorance. She'd done it before. People said things when they thought you couldn't understand, little cruelties, invisible cuts. It was safer not to bleed. But tonight, something in her shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the memory of her father correcting her pronunciation of a classical Arabic verse, whispering, "Words are bridges, Nora," even when others use them as walls. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself, and forced her steps forward. Cadel didn't stop. You see, he said in Arabic again, gesturing subtly toward her as she placed the bottle on the table. They only know yes, sir, and no, sir. No depth. No pride. Nora's eyes flicked up, just for a second, enough for him to notice the dark fire in them. Something unreadable passed between them, but he dismissed it with a smirk. She stepped back, folded her hands, and waited. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away. But instead, she stood perfectly still, her expression calm. If he wanted to see a servant, she'd give him one, but on her terms. Open it, Cadel ordered in English this time, leaning back. And don't touch the bottleneck with your peasant hands. Laughter again. Louder. Nora swallowed. The cork hissed softly, the sound sharp as a blade in the heavy silence that followed. Her reflection flickered in the glass, her own eyes looking back, proud, wounded, unbroken. Cadel tilted his head, almost amused. Tell me, girl, he said, do you even know what Dom Perignon represents? Her voice came quiet but steady. Excellence, sir. Wrong, he said, leaning forward. It represents civilization. Refinement. The difference between us and... His words hung in the air, unfinished. Nora met his gaze for the first time, and something in her eyes, calm cutting, made him pause. The champagne flute trembled slightly in his hand. He didn't know why. Have you ever been underestimated, and wished you could show someone the truth they couldn't see? Share your thoughts below. The laughter at table 12 didn't fade, it thickened. Each chuckle was another nail in the coffin of Nora's composure. Cadel reclined in his chair, swirling his champagne as though the bubbles themselves were applauding him. You see, he continued in Arabic, they only smile because they must. Beneath that, nothing but dust. Nora's knuckles whitened around the bottle. Her breathing slowed, her body rigid, but her eyes were fire behind glass. When her father had taught her language, he said it was both a weapon and a mercy. You can destroy with words, Nora, he'd whispered, or you can heal. Choose wisely. But tonight, she wasn't sure which choice this would be. Cadel's companions, a real estate tycoon, a film producer, and a nervous young investor, leaned closer, feeding on the spectacle. They laughed as if cruelty were sport. Translate that for me, the producer smirked in English, nudging Cadel. What did you say? Oh, just admiring our help, Cadel said, flashing his teeth. Then, in Arabic again, louder this time. Maybe she thinks champagne comes from the supermarket. They never learn refinement. She probably can't read the label. Laughter erupted again. Nora froze mid-pour. The words burned like acid down her spine. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. No. She would not let him define her. Cadel noticed the flicker in her face, the tightening of her jaw, the stillness that wasn't submission but restraint. Careful, he said mockingly in English, you might spill it. Then you'd owe me your wages for a month. The guests chuckled. Nora said nothing. For one long moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Forks paused midair. Conversations dimmed. People were watching now, pretending not to. And then Cadel did something crueler, the kind of thing powerful men do when they need to remind the world who they are. He pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found a digital document written entirely in classical Arabic. His lips curled with amusement. Gentlemen, he announced loudly, switching to English so the nearby tables could hear, let's make this entertaining. If our waitress can translate even one paragraph of this correctly, I'll give her $1,000. But if she fails, his tone sharpened, I'll make sure she never works in this city again. A murmur swept through the restaurant. Someone gasped. The sound of a fork clattering onto a plate echoed like thunder. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. Her first instinct was fear, the kind that squeezes breath from your lungs. But beneath it, another feeling stirred. Something colder. Stronger. She looked at the screen. The verses were unmistakable. Al-Mutanabi, her father's favorite poet. Cadel leaned back, smirking. Well. Nora inhaled slowly, the air trembling in her lungs. Then she set the champagne bottle down with deliberate care and turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was low, calm, melodic, and precise. I can read it perfectly, she said in flawless Arabic. The laughter stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum quieter. Cadel blinked, confused. What? Nora's voice rose just enough to fill the space without shouting. She began to recite the passage aloud, each syllable rolling like silk and steel. I am he whose words the blind have seen and whose verses the deaf have heard. I sleep content while others lie awake, quarreling over the meaning of what I've written. Her pronunciation was immaculate, not just fluent, but scholarly. Her father's cadence echoed through her. Every head at the table turned. Every glass paused midair. Then she switched to English, her tone steady, her gaze locked on Cadel. This is Al-Mutanabi's declaration of genius, she explained. A poet so certain of his mastery that he claimed even the impossible would bow to his art. It means, her eyes didn't waver, true brilliance doesn't need your validation. It commands respect by existing. A collective exhale rippled across the restaurant. Cadel's mouth opened, then shut. The smile had drained from his face. His companions looked between them, uneasy. The silence was electric, the kind that vibrates through marble and bone. And then Nora took one step closer, her voice quieter now, sharper. There is a grammatical flaw in this passage, she said in Arabic. A deliberate one. A test for those who pretend to understand, but do not. Tell me, Mr. Mansouri, Did you notice it? He stiffened. The phone in his hand slipped just slightly, his knuckles white. The verb, she said softly, pointing to the line on his screen. It doesn't match the meter. Any true scholar would have seen it instantly. Whispers erupted around them. Someone near the bar murmured, "She's right." Catel's entourage began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The film producer looked down at his plate. The investor coughed. Nora continued, voice trembling not from fear now, but power. "My father used to teach this poem to his students," she said. "He said it was about dignity, how art and truth outlive arrogance, how even kings are humbled by knowledge." For a heartbeat, the world was still. Then, somewhere in the restaurant, a single person began to clap. It grew one, then two, then dozens. The sound swelled, echoing against marble and glass. Applause filled the room. Catel sat frozen, color draining from his face. Nora bowed her head slightly, whispered, "Enjoy your evening, sir," and turned away, leaving behind a silence so complete it was deafening. If you were Nora, would you have stayed silent, or spoken up, knowing it could cost you everything? Share your thoughts below. The applause had ended, but the echo lingered, trapped in the chandelier glass, the marble, the stunned air. Nora's heart still raced as she stepped through the swinging kitchen doors, the roar of approval fading behind her like a dream she didn't quite believe. She set the empty tray down on the counter, her hands trembling now that no one could see. The other servers stared, eyes wide with a cocktail of awe and fear. "Holy Nora," whispered Samir, the bartender. Did you hear them clapping?" She forced a shaky smile. "I heard." "You destroyed him." Her stomach twisted at the word. Destroyed. It didn't feel like that. It felt like something between freedom and panic. Nora walked to the break room, her breathing uneven. The adrenaline drained, leaving exhaustion behind, a weight settling into her bones. Her father's voice replayed in her head, "Words are bridges." But right now, those words felt like they might collapse beneath her feet. She knew what she'd done was dangerous. A man like Catel Mansouri didn't lose publicly without consequence. Her phone buzzed. A message from her manager. "Stay low. Don't speak to the press if anyone asks. Go home early." Her fingers tightened around the screen. Press? Already? She exhaled shakily, untied her apron, and stepped into the cool night air behind the restaurant. The city hummed, indifferent and endless. A light drizzle began to fall, dotting her hair like tears she refused to shed. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt exposed. Across town, Catel Mansouri sat alone in the back of his Rolls-Royce. The laughter from earlier now felt distant, like the echo of someone else's arrogance. The car's interior smelled of leather and faint cologne, but underneath it was the metallic scent of humiliation. He replayed the moment over and over, the clarity of her pronunciation, the confidence in her gaze, the silence that swallowed his laughter whole. His driver spoke softly. "Home, sir." He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, watching rain smear the city lights into streaks of gold. For the first time in years, he felt small. He unlocked his phone and opened the document, the same poem she'd corrected him on. Her words echoed in his mind, "There is a deliberate grammatical flaw in this very poem." He scanned the line again and again, but couldn't see it. Maybe she thinks champagne comes from the supermarket. They never learn refinement. She probably can't read the label. Laughter erupted again. Nora froze mid-pour. The words burned like acid down her spine. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. No. She would not let him define her. Catel noticed the flicker in her face, the tightening of her jaw, the stillness that wasn't submission but restraint. "Careful," he said mockingly in English, "you might spill it. Then you'd owe me your wages for a month." The guests chuckled. Nora said nothing. For one long moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Forks paused midair. Conversations dimmed. People were watching now, pretending not to. And then Catel did something crueler, the kind of thing powerful men do when they need to remind the world who they are. He pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found a digital document written entirely in classical Arabic. His lips curled with amusement. "Gentlemen," he announced loudly, switching to English so the nearby tables could hear, "let's make this entertaining. If our waitress can translate even one paragraph of this correctly, I'll give her $1,000. But if she fails, his tone sharpened, I'll make sure she never works in this city again. A murmur swept through the restaurant. Someone gasped. The sound of a fork clattering onto a plate echoed like thunder. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. Her first instinct was fear, the kind that squeezes breath from your lungs. But beneath it, another feeling stirred. Something colder. Stronger. She looked at the screen. The verses were unmistakable. Al-Mutanabbi, her father's favorite poet. Cadel leaned back, smirking. Well. Nora inhaled slowly, the air trembling in her lungs. Then she set the champagne bottle down with deliberate care and turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was low, calm, melodic, and precise. I can read it perfectly, she said in flawless Arabic. The laughter stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum quieter. Cadel blinked, confused. What? Nora's voice rose just enough to fill the space without shouting. She began to recite the passage aloud, each syllable rolling like silk and steel. I am he whose words the blind have seen and whose verses the deaf have heard. I sleep content while others lie awake, quarreling over the meaning of what I've written. Her pronunciation was immaculate, not just fluent, but scholarly. Her father's cadence echoed through her. Every head at the table turned. Every glass paused midair. Then she switched to English, her tone steady, her gaze locked on Cadel. This is Al-Mutanabbi's declaration of genius, she explained. A poet so certain of his mastery that he claimed even the impossible would bow to his art. It means, her eyes didn't waver, true brilliance doesn't need your validation. It commands respect by existing. A collective exhale rippled across the restaurant. Cadel's mouth opened, then shut. The smile had drained from his face. His companions looked between them, uneasy. The silence was electric, the kind that vibrates through marble and bone. And then Nora took one step closer, her voice quieter now, sharper. There is a grammatical flaw in this passage, she said in Arabic. A deliberate one. A test for those who pretend to understand, but do not. Tell me, Mr. Mansouri, did you notice it? He stiffened. The phone in his hand slipped just slightly, his knuckles white. The verb, she said softly, pointing to the line on his screen. It doesn't match the meter. Any true scholar would have seen it instantly. Whispers erupted around them. Someone near the bar murmured, she's right. Cadel's entourage began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The film producer looked down at his plate. The investor coughed. Nora continued, voice trembling not from fear now, but power. My father used to teach this poem to his students, she said. He said it was about dignity, how art and truth outlive arrogance, how even kings are humbled by knowledge. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Then, somewhere in the restaurant, a single person began to clap. It grew one, then two, then dozens. The sound swelled, echoing against marble and glass. Applause filled the room. Cadel sat frozen, color draining from his face. Nora bowed her head slightly, whispered, "Enjoy your evening, sir," and turned away, leaving behind a silence so complete it was deafening. If you were Nora, would you have stayed silent, or spoken up, knowing it could cost you everything? Share your thoughts below. The applause had ended, but the echo lingered, trapped in the chandelier glass, the marble, the stunned air. Nora's heart still raced as she stepped through the swinging kitchen doors, the roar of approval fading behind her like a dream she didn't quite believe. She set the empty tray down on the counter, her hands trembling now that no one could see. The other servers stared, eyes wide with a cocktail of awe and fear. "Holy Nora," whispered Samir, the bartender. Did you hear them clapping?" She forced a shaky smile. "I heard. You destroyed him." Her stomach twisted at the word. Destroyed. It didn't feel like that. It felt like something between freedom and panic. Nora walked to the break room, her breathing uneven. The adrenaline drained, leaving exhaustion behind, a weight settling into her bones. Her father's voice replayed in her head, "Words are bridges." But right now, those words felt like they might collapse beneath her feet. She knew what she'd done was dangerous. A man like Cadel Mansouri didn't lose publicly without consequence. Her phone buzzed. A message from her manager. "Stay low. Don't speak to the press if anyone asks. Go home early." Her fingers tightened around the screen. Press? Already? She exhaled shakily, untied her apron, and stepped into the cool night air behind the restaurant. The city hummed, indifferent and endless. A light drizzle began to fall, dotting her hair like tears she refused to shed. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt exposed. Across town, Cadel Mungsuri sat alone in the back of his Rolls-Royce. The laughter from earlier now felt distant, like the echo of someone else's arrogance. The car's interior smelled of leather and faint cologne, but underneath it was the metallic scent of humiliation. He replayed the moment over and over, the clarity of her pronunciation, the confidence in her gaze, the silence that swallowed his laughter whole. His driver spoke softly. "Home, sir." He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, watching rain smear the city lights into streaks of gold. For the first time in years, he felt small. He unlocked his phone and opened the document, the same poem she'd corrected him on. Her words echoed in his mind. There is a deliberate grammatical flaw in this very poem. He scanned the line again and again, but couldn't see it. "Damn it," he muttered, tossing the phone onto the seat beside him. It wasn't just that she'd embarrassed him. It was the way she did it, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with dignity. The kind of dignity he couldn't buy, couldn't fake. He'd spent years using words as weapons, in boardrooms, in interviews, in deals. But tonight, words had stripped him bare. A notification blinked across the phone screen. A trending post. #Waitress speaks fluently, billionaire humbled by restaurant worker in viral moment. The thumbnail was his own face, frozen mid-smirk. His pulse quickened. "No," he breathed, scrolling through dozens of comments, clips, replays. Millions of views. A global audience watching his arrogance collapse. He slammed his fist against the car door, startling his driver. "Turn around," he snapped. "Take me back." Meanwhile, Nora sat on the curb outside Milano's, the rain now heavier. Her jacket clung to her skin, but she didn't move. She was too tired, too full of everything. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a message from Maria, her manager. He left furious. "Security says don't come tomorrow. Just stay safe, Nora." She exhaled. There it was. Consequence. She pressed her palms together, whispering under her breath, "Baba, I didn't mean to start a war." When her father died, she promised she'd never let her intelligence make her a target. Tonight, she'd broken that promise. Still, part of her felt her father's pride glowing through the storm. Inside the car, Cadel's anger twisted with something unfamiliar, shame. He'd never liked that word. It felt like rust, slow and irreversible. He wanted to call someone, his PR team, his assistant, anyone who could fix this. But what could they fix? What could he say? "I insulted a woman, and she knew my language better than I did." The irony cut deeper the more he thought about it. "Sir," his driver asked gently, "are we still returning?" Cadel hesitated, then nodded. "No. Take me home." He leaned back, closing his eyes. The image of her face wouldn't fade, that calm defiance, the way she stood even when every man at the table tried to laugh her away. It wasn't defiance for attention. It was purity, truth. He envied her. The next morning, headlines screamed across social media feeds. Waitress silences billionaire with poetry. Language of power reversed in viral restaurant showdown. Nora avoided them all. She turned off her phone, focused on her mother's breakfast, and tried to pretend life was normal. But the doorbell rang at noon. A delivery man stood there, holding a white envelope embossed with gold. "For Miss Nora Hassan," he said. Inside. "Ms. Hassan, Mr. Mungsuri requests a private meeting this evening to discuss recent events. Management, Milano's." She stared at the paper for a long moment. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Another part, the one that had looked him in the eyes and spoken truth, wanted to know why. Milano's was closed for a private event. To the public, it was a routine evening. To Nora, it was a trap wrapped in velvet. The restaurant looked eerily different without the noise, the guests, the clinking of glasses. Only one table was set, the same one from that night. 2 glasses. A bottle of still water. No champagne. She hesitated at the entrance, tugging at her sleeve. "I shouldn't have come," she muttered under her breath. Maria, her manager, placed a hand on her arm. He insisted. I'll stay nearby. Why does a man like that even want to talk to me? Maria sighed. Maybe he finally realized silence is heavier than pride. Before Nora could respond, the doors to the private dining hall opened. Cadel Mansouri stood there. No entourage. No arrogance, at least not the kind she remembered. He wore a simple gray suit, his expression unreadable, though the faintest trace of exhaustion hung beneath his eyes. Nora Hassan, he said quietly, stepping forward. Thank you for coming. His voice was steady, but stripped of the sharpness it once carried. Nora crossed her arms. You didn't leave me much of a choice. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. You're right. He gestured toward the table. Please. I prefer to stand. He nodded once, accepting it. Then I'll stand too. For a long moment, the silence between them stretched, taut, fragile. I didn't call you here to apologize, he began. Of course not, she said dryly. That would require humility. He inhaled through his nose, not angry, not defensive, just tired. I came to understand. Nora frowned. Understand what? How a waitress learned to speak like a poet. And how I, with all my education and privilege, could still manage to be so small. Her arms dropped to her sides. That wasn't the answer she expected. He moved toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. The city shimmered beyond the glass. When I was your age, he said slowly, I was in London. I remember being laughed at for my accent. I learned English like a weapon. It made me powerful. Feared. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why language mattered. He turned back to her. You reminded me. Nora studied him, the billionaire who once humiliated her, now confessing vulnerability like a man confessing a sin. Still, part of her heart remained wary. Words aren't redemption, she said softly. No, he admitted. But they can be the beginning of it. Maria peeked through the kitchen window, biting her lip. She'd never seen Nora look so conflicted, or Cadel so human. Back inside, Nora walked to the table, tracing the rim of one glass with her finger. Do you know what humiliation feels like, Mr. Mansouri? He didn't flinch. Yes. No, she said firmly. You know embarrassment. The difference is that one fades, and the other builds walls inside you. He absorbed her words like a man who'd been starved of truth. Then tonight, I don't want to speak. I want to listen. Something in his tone disarmed her. She sat down slowly. He followed suit. Nora took a breath, her voice quieter now. My father taught me Arabic poetry by candlelight when I was a child. He believed language could heal. When he died, I promised I'd never forget that. But working here, she looked around the empty restaurant. You start to feel invisible. Like every word you know doesn't matter if no one hears it. He leaned forward slightly. And yet you made the world hear you. She shook her head. That wasn't courage. That was desperation. You mocked me in a language I loved. It felt like losing him all over again. The words landed heavy. Cadel's gaze dropped to the table. After a moment, he spoke, quieter than before. I deserve that. No, she said, surprising herself. You deserve to learn from it. Their eyes met, not with hostility now, but with something unspoken. Recognition, maybe. Two people standing on opposite sides of the same bridge, realizing it was built from the same pain. A soft chime interrupted them, Cadel's phone buzzing. He silenced it immediately, but not before Nora glimpsed the name on the screen, Rashid Khalil. Professor Khalil? She asked, surprised. He blinked. You know him. He was one of my father's students. A slow, ironic smile tugged at his lips. He's been calling me non-stop since that night. He said I should offer you a position. I didn't believe him, until now. Her eyes widened. A position? Yes, he said simply. You belong somewhere where your words matter. And if I can use my influence to make that happen, maybe it's the first decent thing I've done in years. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Gratitude and suspicion wrestled within her. You think money can make this right? No, he said softly. But maybe opportunity can. The rain began to fall again outside, a mirror of the night that started it all. They sat in silence, the sound filling the spaces words couldn't reach. Finally, Cadel said, Nora, do you believe people can change? She studied him for a long moment. Not easily. But sometimes one moment, one truth, forces them to. He nodded, a faint, sad smile ghosting his lips. Then perhaps this was mine. He rose, placing an envelope on the table. The foundation offer is inside. No strings attached. Whether you take it or not, thank you for reminding me that knowledge, not wealth, defines worth. He turned to leave. But just before he reached the door, Nora's voice stopped him. Mr. Mansouri. He paused. You said you wanted to understand, she said quietly. Then don't run from what shamed you. Face it. That's how understanding begins. He turned slightly, met her gaze, and for the first time, truly bowed his head. The letter sat untouched on Nora's kitchen table. The foundation offer, embossed seal, elegant font, a doorway to a life she'd once only imagined. But she couldn't open it. Not yet. Her mother's oxygen machine hummed softly in the next room, each hiss a reminder of how fragile life still was. Nora leaned back in her chair, staring at the envelope, her mind looping through last night's conversation. Cadel Mansouri had looked broken. Not defeated, but human. She hated that part of her wanted to understand him. Across the city, Cadel sat in his penthouse library, surrounded by silent shelves of unread books. The city sprawled below like a restless ocean of light. He stared at an old photograph on his desk, his younger self beside a woman and a boy, maybe 10 years old, smiling with unguarded joy. His son, Amir. Cadel hadn't looked at that photo in years. He'd buried it beneath meetings, contracts, and money. But Nora's words had unearthed something in him he thought long dead, the ability to feel shame and longing in equal measure. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. A voice answered, tired, brittle. Cadel. Layla, he said softly. It's me. On the other end, his ex-wife sighed. It's been 3 years. What do you want? He hesitated. Do you remember that poem Amir used to recite? The one from Al-Mutanabi. Silence. Then why? He swallowed hard. Because a waitress recited it to me the other night. Flawlessly. Corrected me when I misread it. Layla let out a low, incredulous laugh. You corrected? That's poetic justice. He smiled faintly. Maybe I deserved it. Her tone softened, just a little. Amir would have liked her. The line went quiet again. Neither knew how to bridge the chasm that loss had carved between them. Finally, she said, You're trying to make amends, aren't you? I'm trying to remember who I was before arrogance became armor. Then don't call me, she said gently. Call the people who still have a chance to forgive you. That night, Nora finally opened the envelope. Inside wasn't just the offer, there was a handwritten note. For what it's worth, I've read every line of Al-Mutanabi since that night. Your father's work deserves recognition. I'd like to fund a public reading in his honor. Cadel Mansouri. Her heart twisted. How did he even know about her father's publications? She reached into the drawer and pulled out an old worn journal, her father's, edges yellowed from years of use. Inside were his notes, translations, and one name circled in red ink, Professor Rashid Khalil. Her father's old colleague. The same man who'd been messaging her recently. Maybe this foundation wasn't just pity. Maybe it was destiny stirring. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then texted. Professor Khalil, I need to talk about my father. And about Cadel Mansouri. The next afternoon, she met Professor Khalil in a quiet cafe lined with dusty books and mismatched chairs. He was older now, silver-haired, with eyes that carried the weight of too many memories. My dear Nora, he greeted warmly. You have your father's eyes. She smiled faintly. You knew him well? Better than most, he said, sipping his tea. Ahmad Hassan was a giant in the world of linguistics, a man who believed words could heal what politics destroyed. Her throat tightened. He died before he could publish his final paper. It's still in my apartment, unfinished. Khalil nodded. I know. He was working on something remarkable, a study connecting ancient Arabic meter to modern European verse. Your father saw unity where others saw division. Her eyes brightened. He used to say that languages were mirrors of one another. Yes, Khalil said softly. And do you know who funded that research in the beginning? She shook her head. Cadel Mansuri's father. The words hit her like a gust of cold air. What? Khalil leaned forward. Before he became an oil magnate, the elder Mansuri was a patron of the arts. He believed wealth should preserve culture. But after he died, his son, Khalil's tone darkened, abandoned that legacy for business. Nora sat back, stunned. So the same man who humiliated me, his family once supported my father's work? Khalil nodded. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. Later that evening, Nora stood outside Cadel's foundation headquarters, a sleek glass tower that glowed like an ember against the dusk. Inside, she found him sitting in a quiet conference room, reviewing documents. He looked up as she entered, surprised, but not unwelcome. You came, he said softly. I came because I needed answers, she replied. Did you know my father? He blinked. Your father? Ahmad Hassan, the scholar whose work your father funded. Recognition flickered across his face, then regret. My God. I did. He came to our home when I was a child. He and my father used to argue about poetry at dinner. Nora's voice trembled. He believed your family's legacy was about culture, not consumption. That wealth had a duty to protect wisdom. He lowered his gaze. He was right. And I failed him. She stepped closer, her tone soft but firm. Maybe you failed yourself too. Cadel looked up. Their eyes met, two people bound by the ghosts of men who'd believed in words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photo, of his father and hers, side by side smiling. I found this yesterday, he said quietly. It seems our paths were intertwined long before that night. Nora stared at the image, her throat tight. Then maybe this isn't about humiliation. Maybe it's about restoration. He nodded slowly. Maybe it's time I rebuild what my father started. The next few days moved like slow water, quiet, hesitant, unsure whether to flow forward or retreat. Nora found herself at the Foundation's library, reviewing her father's manuscripts for digitization. Rows of books towered around her, smelling faintly of dust and lemon oil. It was peaceful, too peaceful, until a familiar voice broke the silence. Do you always work this late? She looked up to see Cadel leaning against the doorway, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, the arrogance once etched into his posture replaced by something softer. I prefer working when no one's watching, she said. Less judgment that way. He smiled faintly. You think I'm here to judge? I think you're here because you don't know how to stay away, she replied, not looking up. He laughed quietly, and it startled her, not the sound but the warmth in it. It wasn't mocking. It was real. Maybe you're right, he said. Curiosity is my worst habit. Arrogance used to be, she muttered. He tilted his head, amused. You're not wrong. She glanced up, caught the glint of humor in his eyes, and almost smiled despite herself. They ended up working side by side, she cataloging manuscripts, him leafing through old correspondence between their fathers. The silence that stretched between them was no longer tense. It was companionable. Did you know your father once refused my father's funding? Cadel asked suddenly. She blinked. What? Why? He smiled faintly. Because your father said, true knowledge shouldn't be bought, it should be shared. Her throat tightened. That sounds like him. Your father had courage, Cadel said quietly. He spoke to my father as an equal. No flattery, no fear. I think my father respected that more than any contract. She looked at him. And you? Do you respect that? He met her gaze. Now I do. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Something fragile hovered in the air between them, not quite affection, not yet forgiveness, but the first glimmer of both. Later, as rain began to tap against the tall windows, Nora gathered her things. Cadel glanced up. Do you need a ride home? I usually walk, she said. In this weather? She shrugged. I've had worse nights. He hesitated, then picked up his coat. Then let me walk with you. Her brows lifted. The billionaire walks. He grinned. Sometimes even kings need to remember what streets feel like. They stepped out into the drizzle, the city lights blurring like watercolor. The air smelled of wet stone and jasmine from a nearby flower stall. For a while, they walked in silence. Then Cadel said quietly, "You know, I used to think dignity came from control, from never letting anyone see weakness." Nora tilted her head. "And now? Now I think it comes from knowing when to let someone see it." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." "I think your father would have terrified me," he said with mock seriousness. "I'm glad I only had to face you." She laughed, the first genuine light laugh since the night of the confrontation. It echoed softly under the rain. "Be careful," she said, teasing. "People might think you have a heart." "Too late," he murmured, watching her with a look that lingered just a little too long. They stopped at a small cafe near her apartment, one of those dim, hidden places that smelled of cardamom and roasted beans. Nora insisted on paying for their coffee. "I can afford it," she said when he protested. "That's not the point," he replied. "It is to me," she said with a smile. "Equality starts small." He chuckled. "Then allow me to leave the tip." "Deal." They sat by the window, the rain outside glowing gold from passing headlights. Cadel sipped his espresso and watched her. "You know, when I first saw you at Milano's, I didn't notice your face. I just saw service. Another part of the machine that keeps people like me comfortable." Her gaze softened. "And now? Now I see someone who dismantled the machine with a single sentence." She blushed faintly, setting her cup down. "You really need to work on your metaphors." He laughed. "Probably." The tension between them, once jagged and cold, now hummed with something alive, something that neither wanted to name. When they reached her apartment building, the rain had slowed to a gentle mist. She turned to him, her hair damp, her eyes bright in the streetlight. "You didn't have to walk me home." He shrugged. "I wanted to. Maybe I just didn't want the conversation to end." She hesitated. Conversations can be dangerous. They make people care. "Maybe that's the point," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, electric. Then Nora smiled softly. "Good night, Mr. Mungsuri." "Good night, Nora," he replied, and for the first time, he said her name without condescension, without distance. Just truth. That night, lying in bed, Nora stared at the ceiling, the sound of rain lulling her. She didn't know what this new connection meant, forgiveness, friendship, or something deeper, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Across the city, Cadel stood by his window, the lights below reflecting in his eyes. For decades, he'd measured his worth in numbers. But now he realized, dignity, respect, and love weren't currencies. They were languages. And perhaps, at last, he was learning how to speak. Have you ever felt your opinion of someone completely change once you truly listened to them? What made the difference? Words or sincerity? Share your moment below. It started with a headline. Billionaire's charity project exposed as PR stunt. Sources claim Waitress used for sympathy. The photo beneath it, Nora's, stopped her heart cold. There she was, walking beside Cadel in the rain, coffee cups in hand, captioned, "The mysterious woman linked to Cadel Mungsuri's sudden philanthropy." Nora's phone exploded with calls, her manager, the restaurant owner, a journalist asking for comment. The whispers she thought she'd outrun were back, crueler this time, gold digger, opportunist, actress. She turned off her phone, her hands trembling. When she reached the foundation office that morning, cameras were already outside. Cadel was at the entrance, talking to security, expression tight but calm. He saw her instantly, but instead of the warm recognition she expected, there was something else in his eyes. Guilt. Hesitation. She stopped in front of him, voice low but sharp. "You leaked it." He flinched. "No, I didn't." "Then who did?" "I don't know," he said quickly. "But I'll find out. Nora, I swear." "You swore before," she cut in, her voice trembling. "You swore this was about my father, about redemption, not spectacle." He stepped closer. It is. You have to believe me. I can't, she whispered. Not when every time I look at you, I see a man who's built his life on using people. He looked like she'd slapped him. Nora, he said quietly, you think I wanted this? You think I'd risk humiliating the only person who's ever... Ever what? She snapped. Ever challenged you? Ever said no to your money? Her voice echoed in the lobby. A few staff members froze. Cameras flashed outside. Cadel lowered his gaze, jaw tightening. You don't understand. No, she said, stepping back. I do. I just thought maybe you'd changed. That night, the city felt colder. Nora walked home under the same streetlights that once seemed kind. Now they glared. She reached her apartment, collapsed on the floor, and finally let the tears come. On her table, the foundation letter still sat, now creased and coffee-stained. The handwriting that once made her heart twist now looked like deceit. She tore the letter in half, then in quarters. And still, somehow, it didn't make her feel free. Across town, Cadel sat in his office long after midnight, staring at his reflection in the dark window. His phone buzzed, his publicist. He ignored it. Then another call. Unknown number. He answered, voice rough. What? Mr. Mansouri, this is Professor Khalil. Cadel blinked. Professor. I thought you should know, the old man said gravely. The leak didn't come from the foundation. It came from your company's board. They wanted to discredit your new philanthropy division before it drew resources away from the core investors. Cadel's pulse thudded. They used her. They used both of you. An hour later, he was at her apartment building, drenched, uninvited, but desperate. He knocked once. Twice. No answer. Finally, the door opened a crack. Nora stood there, pale and silent. He looked wrecked, soaked to the bone, no driver, no umbrella, eyes rimmed red. Nora, he said softly. Please listen. She crossed her arms. Say what you came to say. It wasn't me. It was the board. They saw our connection as weakness. Then why not stop it? She demanded. Because by the time I found out, it was already everywhere. Her voice shook. And now everyone thinks I'm some desperate charity case who let herself be paraded for pity. He stepped forward. You are not a case, Nora. You're the reason I remembered who I am. She looked away, tears forming. Then why does it still hurt? Because it's real, he said simply. For a long moment, the world went quiet, only rain, only breath. Then she whispered, I can't do this. Not now. And before he could speak again, she closed the door. The next morning, Cadel walked into his company boardroom, silent, stone-faced. Executives in suits straightened nervously as he entered. He dropped a file on the table. Inside, screenshots, message threads, and proof of who leaked the story. You used her name, he said, voice low. You turned an innocent woman into a headline to protect your profits. Cadel, it was just PR. PR. His tone was quiet, lethal. She's not a campaign. She's a person. He picked up the file again. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as CEO. The foundation stays independent. I won't build another empire on exploitation. Gasps rippled around the room. He turned and walked out without another word. Nora didn't hear about his resignation until 2 days later, through the same news outlets that had humiliated her. Cadel Mansouri steps down, cites ethical crisis. She read the headline twice, unsure whether to feel vindicated or guilty. At that moment, her mother stirred in the next room, coughing weakly. Nora rushed in, adjusting the oxygen mask. Her mother's eyes opened faintly. Habibti, she whispered. You look tired. Nora smiled through tears. It's been a hard week. Her mother's frail hand reached for hers. Hard things make good hearts stronger. Nora closed her eyes. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe pain was the only teacher that taught empathy well. Across the city, Cadel packed his office. He paused by the photo of their fathers, set it carefully in a box, and whispered, Forgive me. For her sake, I'll be better. When he left, The building felt cavernous, hollow. He didn't know if he'd ever see Nora again. But for once, he didn't try to control the outcome. He simply let silence be the apology he couldn't yet give aloud. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt washed in sorrow. For days, Nora moved through her apartment like a ghost, cooking without eating, sleeping without rest. Her phone stayed dark, except for the occasional message from journalists asking for her side of the story. She never replied. Instead, she returned to the one place that had never lied to her, her father's study. The books still smelled faintly of dust and jasmine. She ran her fingers over the spines, pausing at one in particular, Al-Mutanabbi, the complete works. The same poet who had changed everything that night in Milano's. She opened the book to her father's handwritten notes in the margins. Words, my dear, are the most powerful when they are spoken with dignity, even when no one listens. She exhaled, her throat tight. That was the lesson she'd forgotten in the noise, that dignity didn't require anyone's validation, not even Catel's. She sank into the chair, eyes tracing the lines of her father's delicate handwriting. And then, slowly, she began to write her own. A letter. Catel. I don't know if this will ever reach you. Maybe it shouldn't. When you stood in that restaurant, I thought I hated you. But I've come to realize, what I hated was how much you reminded me of myself before that night. Proud. Afraid. Guarded. We both wore masks, just for different reasons. You once said power without humanity is hollow. I used to think you were saying that to make yourself feel better. Now I think you are asking me to believe in you, to give you the chance to prove it true. I don't know if I can forgive everything. But I know I don't want my story to end in bitterness. Not my father's, and not mine. Wherever you are, I hope you find peace in what you've built, not from wealth, but from courage. Nora. She folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it on her desk. No address. No plan to send it. But in writing it she felt lighter, as though her father himself had taken her hand and whispered, "It's time to let go." Across the city, Catel sat alone in his penthouse, the same space that once symbolized triumph. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The board's betrayal, the resignation, the loss of everything he'd built, none of it hurt as much as the silence that followed. He turned on the TV without meaning to, flipping through channels until he froze, a live broadcast. Professor Khalil, standing at a podium. And today the professor was saying, "We announced the Hassan Fellowship for Linguistic Excellence, founded in honor of the late Professor Ahmad Hassan, and made possible by a private benefactor who wished to remain anonymous." The audience applauded. Catel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The screen shifted to a photo, Nora, standing beside the professor, smiling faintly. Her eyes were tired, but radiant. Alive. His chest ached. She'd gone back to her calling, teaching, building bridges, creating something pure from the ashes of what they'd lost. He turned off the TV, his reflection flickering in the dark screen. Anonymous, he murmured. She hadn't mentioned him. She hadn't erased him either. It was her way of saying goodbye, or maybe forgiveness. He walked to the window, looking out over the city that had both made and unmade him. Below, the lights shimmered like stars trapped in concrete. And for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer. Not for success. Not for absolution. But for courage, the kind that could face truth without defense. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. Something restless pulsed inside her, unfinished, unresolved. She rose from bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city was quiet. Somewhere out there, she knew, he was looking at the same skyline. The thought both hurt and comforted her. A faint breeze stirred her letter on the table. It slid toward the edge, teetered, and fell to the floor, landing open. The last line caught her eye again. Wherever you are, I hope you find peace in what you've built, not from wealth, but from courage. She smiled faintly. Courage, she whispered to the night. Let's see if I have any left. She picked up her phone, the same one that had stayed dark for days, and typed a message. Just 4 words. We need to talk. Catel was still awake when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't look. He assumed it was another journalist, another investor, another ghost from the world he'd left behind. But then he saw the name. Nora. For a long, stunned moment, he didn't move. Then his thumb trembled as he opened the message. His heart stuttered when he read it. He typed, erased, then finally replied, "Name the place." Her response came almost instantly. "Milano's. Tomorrow night." His breath caught. The same restaurant where it all began. A full circle, or maybe a final goodbye. He didn't know which. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something that wasn't regret. Hope. If you were Nora, would you risk reopening a wound to find closure, or leave the past sealed forever? Sometimes love's hardest act isn't walking away, but turning back. Milano's looked the same, golden chandeliers spilling their light like rivers, glassware gleaming under their shimmer. But for Nora, the restaurant no longer felt like a cathedral of power. It felt like a test she'd already passed. She stood by the entrance, hands clasped, waiting. The maitre d' smiled politely, unaware of the history that hung in the air. She caught her reflection in a nearby mirror. No longer the trembling waitress carrying trays too heavy for her arms. Now, a lecturer. A woman who'd earned respect not by demanding it, but by embodying it. And yet, her heart thudded like a nervous girl's. Then, the door opened. Cadel entered. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or entourages this time. No glittering watch, no suit meant to intimidate. Just a simple black shirt and a hesitant expression that made him look startlingly human. Their eyes met across the same marble floors where arrogance once collided with courage. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Nora broke the silence. "You're late." He smiled faintly. "Traffic. Or nerves. Maybe both." She almost laughed. Almost. The maitre d' led them to a quiet table in the corner. The same spot where it had all happened. Cadel noticed and said softly, "You picked this table on purpose." "I did," Nora said, sitting down. "It felt right." For a while, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, apology, pride, longing. Finally, she broke the silence. "You resigned." He nodded. "It was time. I built an empire that forgot people had names." She studied him. "And now? I'm rebuilding, smaller, quieter. The foundation continues independently. It's not about image anymore." She nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I saw the fellowship announcement." His lips curved into a faint smile. "Your father deserved to be remembered." Her eyes softened. "Thank you for that." He looked down, tracing the edge of his water glass. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." A quietness settled, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds space for forgiveness to grow. He finally met her eyes again. "You said once that language can build bridges." "I did." He exhaled. "Then teach me how." Nora tilted her head. "How to what?" "How to speak without hurting. How to listen without power." She smiled faintly. "That's not something you learn overnight." "Then I'll start tonight," he said simply. The waiter approached, but Cadel waved him off gently. "Just tea," he said. Then to her the same. "Tea's perfect," she replied. When the waiter left, Cadel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You know, I almost didn't come." "I almost didn't ask," she said softly. "Why did you?" She hesitated, then looked straight at him. "Because anger stopped feeling like strength. I was tired of defining myself by what I hated." He nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." "And because," she added, her voice gentler now, "my father used to say the hardest language to learn isn't Arabic or French. It's forgiveness." Cadel's eyes glistened. "Then maybe you can teach me that too." Their tea arrived. Neither touched it at first. Nora's gaze drifted to the crystal chandeliers overhead, the same ones that had once cast her humiliation in glittering light. Now, their reflection shimmered across her teacup like quiet redemption. She looked back at him. "Do you regret that night?" He shook his head slowly. "Every second of it, and none of it." She frowned slightly. He explained, "I regret hurting you. But if it hadn't happened, I'd still be the man who mocked people to feel powerful." Her expression softened. "Maybe some things have to break before they can shine." He smiled faintly. "You sound like your father." I'm starting to believe that's the best compliment I'll ever get. Minutes passed. The tea cooled. Yet neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Cadel finally reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather box. Nora blinked, startled. What is that? He opened it. Inside was an old fountain pen, gold-trimmed, the nib worn smooth. It was your father's, he said quietly. Professor Khalil found it among his archives. He thought you should have it. Her breath caught. She reached out, fingers trembling, tracing the name engraved on the side, Ahmad Hassan. I thought it was lost forever, she whispered. Cadel smiled gently. Some things find their way home. Tears welled in her eyes. Not of sorrow, but release. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw not the billionaire who'd humiliated her, but the man who'd chosen to unmake himself for the chance to be decent. Thank you, she said softly. He met her gaze with quiet sincerity. No. Thank you. For reminding me what wealth actually means. A hush settled over Milano's again, though not the oppressive silence of judgment. This was peace. Two people sitting across from each other, their pasts finally laid bare, the weight between them turned into understanding. Nora lifted her cup at last. To second chances. Cadel lifted his too. To the courage to ask for them. They drank. The tea was warm, honeyed, grounding, like language spoken without pride. When they stepped outside, the night air was cool. The city hummed softly around them. Cadel turned to her. Will I see you again? That depends, she said with a teasing smile. Are you planning to keep learning? He laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard. Every day. She smiled, tucking her father's pen safely into her bag. Then maybe you will. They stood for a moment longer under the streetlights, two souls no longer divided by status or shame, but connected by something wordless and real. As she walked away, he called after her in Arabic, his voice gentle, unpolished but sincere. Al-Marifa Haya Al-Jasr. She turned back, smiling. Knowledge is the bridge, she translated softly. He nodded. And you helped me cross. 3 months later. At the university auditorium, Nora stood at the podium, speaking to a sea of students. Behind her, the banner read, the Hassan Fellowship, Bridging Cultures Through Language. In the front row sat her mother, smiling proudly. And beside her, quietly, respectfully, sat Cadel. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. Sometimes love doesn't return as a storm. Sometimes it returns as a calm, the kind that makes everything finally make sense. Would you have given him a second chance, not because he earned it, but because you deserved peace? Tell us below, does forgiveness rebuild bridges, or just teach us to walk alone? The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.